This is Ben. Today we're talking about the Fehler from Codex Lev. Last time we talked about the Fehler as we see it in the Rome manuscript. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the differences between these two. And I think what we'll do is we're going to jump right in, and I will talk about those differences after we finish the end of the sequence. So let's go ahead and start. We're going to start with Lev. Starts with 2 Unterhauen from below. So what you see with this is he says do an Unterhau from the left and then the right. And then if you can hit him with the thrust from the right, then push through with that thrust from the right. Later on, at the end of the text, it says, but if you can hit him with the left, do the left too. So what I think what you're seeing here is really symmetricality, is that you can perform this from either side depending on which side makes the most sense to launch it out of. So here's how I kind of work this. And I feel pretty successful in being able to actually perform the Lev version and the Rome version in sparring and tournament. So what I'm basically doing is I'm kind of starting in a lower guard, and I use these Unterhauen as a way to probe out what my opponent is doing, and to kind of get a feel for how twitchy they are and how jerky they are. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to kind of be doing Unter, just to kind of see, not really committing, right? I'm getting them to the point where they're feeling jumpy about the fact that I'm kind of swiping. If their hands are out there, I might commit to trying to like snipe hand or bat their sword away or something. I'm basically probing that defense. And the Velociraptor probing the defenses to find out where the weakness is. So I'm here, kind of just playing with it, and I'm not worrying about my feet too much at this point, honestly. If you want to make one of them start to look real so they start to really react to them, that's fine too. And it doesn't have to be 1 and then 2 and then 3. I mean, whatever order works. So I might 1, kind of back. I'm just doing this series of Unterhauen to kind of figure out what they're going to do, without fully committing myself yet. When it starts with the example you see in Lev, it says when you can hit them from the right. So starting from the idea from the right, when I feel like I've got a point where they're jumping, I know they're going to kind of be trying to kind of play off the defense of these Unters, then I'm going to launch a thrust. So maybe I've done one already from the left. I'm going to go right and launch my thrust in. I like to do is, as we've talked about the thrust in the Zornhau, we're doing this by extending the arms first and then letting the foot follow with it. So I've done 1, boom, extend and thrust the tip. You want to get that tip out there. This is a provocation. You want to get that tip out there and aggressively in their face as fast as you possibly can. And again, because you're trying to get them to defend it, shoot for face. Right? It doesn't matter really if you're completely in range. It has to be close enough for them to believe it's going to hit them. And it has to be close enough for them to feel like they have to be compelled to defend it. So cut, Unter, and turning into that thrust into the face. Really, I'm doing this, again, to create the initial setup with this. When they do that, it says you're going to ideally before they make contact, right? They move. You know they're going to because you've been playing with them to try to feel out whether this is the right thing to do, right? So you're going to go ahead, when they start to go for that defense, is immediately jerk off, Fetzuk is what it says, around to cross arms on the other side with a step over. I didn't do it here, but with a leap over with the foot. So I end up doing the thrust forward, and then with my leap forward with my foot, cut around to crossed arms on the other side. For now, because of my space, I'm going to ignore the first Unter and jump right to the second. I'm going to go with the second Unter, so I do my second Unter into that thrust, and then pull it with a leap around to this side. So it ends up being there. So this isn't the thing. The end thing really is that is actually the failed cut. So this is, again, it feels like a double failure to me, where I'm doing an initial threat that I'm failing. In this case, a thrust, right? So maybe the failure is only a cut. I don't know. But assuming an initial failed thrust, right, which I cut around to a failed cut, which I'm now again going to into the real one on the other side. So from the example, going straight from how the text is working, I'm taking a thrust forward, ideally probably with my right foot. Right, so I'm extending, it doesn't matter whether it's already forward or not. There. Coming around for the spare on the left as I step, and then jerking back around to hit on the right. Now for me, what works the best is not worrying necessarily about that last step. So the step forward with the left foot I think is 100% necessary to close the distance. And I'm creating this opening to close the distance by doing this Unterhau plus a thrust, I think, right? So I'm doing this Unterhau plus a thrust, and then following that with my strong step from the left to create the to close that distance and get into that space where I'm in the place where I can hit them without moving my feet. Right? Once I've gotten to the point where I can hit them without moving my feet, that's when I'm going to actually hit them, which is going to be with my cut around back to my dominant side with its fair-like motion. So it ends up being boom, boom. So I've done my Unter to a thrust, and I've done my Zver with the step to the left. And then for me, that last cut is hips. And my foot's going to move, but it's going to move, follow my hips, right? So it's going to be for stability and not for distance in this case, that step. So I've cut. I'm using my hips to power that cut. And after the fact, my foot's going to follow so that I'm in balance. But that's fine. So it ends up being boom. In that case. So the way I roll this off, for me, I'm pulling that. As I'm coming around for that cut, I'm just yanking it up. And it's almost actually like we talked about last time, I mentioned Ablaufen, like rolling off on one side. It works best for me, this version works best for me to actually do that. So I'm in this position where I've cut, I'm up into here with my crossed arms, and I want to roll off to my real cut. So the fail cut, I'm kind of getting to this point, and then I'm going to jerk it back. I'm going to pull it back over my head a little bit, let the tip drop as I do this. So it comes around here, and jerk. Just in a circular motion like this. That kind of allows me to jerk and pull that sword backwards without having to stop go, right? I'm using a circular motion to make it happen. So it ends up being. This is different than my interpretation of how I do the Rome version, which we've talked in the last video. The Rome version, I'm kind of transmuting that cut and using the hips to power. In this case, I really am rolling off. And you can do it the other way. So it talks about the idea that if I'm strong and I commit the thrust from the left, roll off into the leap to the right, and then fail it around to the actual side on the other side. So, all together. Done. Unter, Unter. Again, I'm not worrying about the feet too much at this point. Unter, Unter. When I do that second one, it's the thrust, regardless of my foot position. And then cut, cut. It ends up being cut. This is a good way to initiate the Fehler if you're in a lower guard. So Lev covers this very well. You can do the Rome version if you're in a higher guard with it. Thrust. So the whole sequence: Unter, Unter, thrust, cut, cut. Unter, Unter, thrust, cut, cut. Slowing it down just a little bit as we're finishing it up here. Unter, Unter into a thrust, cut, cut. Unter, Unter into a thrust, cut, cut. All right, so a few words at the end here. Some of the things I like about the Lev is that you see this different approach in a lower guard, which I think is really useful. These initiating cuts you see in other places in Lev as well. I think for me, I use them as ways to kind of probe and to work in and feel what my opponent's intention is, which is good. The thrust that you do doesn't have to be from a low guard, right? Anytime I can create that thrust, I can move into this exact same sequence. So Lev is teaching us how to example on how to do it. It doesn't mean you have to do it exactly that way all the time. Right? You're learning the concept, which is taking that thrust and mutating it into this Fehler sequence. So you can take that same idea and apply it elsewhere as well. The last thing I kind of really like about this is you see an overlap between the Halbstuke. So we often, as modern practitioners, like to think about the Halbstuke as these really discrete ideas, and even think of them as techniques. And I think techniques is misleading. I think it's easier to think of these as concepts, right? And conceptually, concepts can overlap. So if my concept is being able to pull back that sword, there's different ways I could make that happen, right? There's different ways I can tsuke and pull that sword back. If my concept is doing knock rising with a void, for example, there's a lot of different footwork, a lot of different techniques I can do to make that knock rising with a void work. I don't have to follow exactly the technique if I'm thinking about the concept. With the Lev text here, which is really interesting, is you're seeing this overlap. So we're describing which is a Fehler, and it's being performed by doing a tsuken. Now, of course, Fehler isn't a Halbstuke, but that's okay, right? So you're seeing is, in this case, is this blurred definition. So if at any point someone's saying, well, what's the difference between a Fehler and a tsuken, there's definitely overlap between these, because you see the word therzuk being used as a way to perform a Fehler. So it's very important, I think, as modern practitioners for us to think about these conceptually rather than draw these hard delineations sometimes between the way we do each of these techniques. All right, thanks TSG. That's it for today. We'll see you next time.